I'm Chipper, 24 years old, and sometimes I still can't believe this Philadelphia apartment is actually mine. Looking around at my own furniture, my framed IT certifications, and the photos of friends who became my real family, I feel proud. The road here wasn't easy. 8 years ago, on my 16th birthday, I packed my bags and left home after my mother turned my special day into yet another celebration for my sister Brianna. She said my sister was sensitive and needed more attention. So I disappeared. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you want to hear how I went from sleeping on park benches to building a life my family now regrets missing. Growing up, our family consisted of 4 people: my mom, Linda, my stepdad, Richard, my younger sister, Brianna, who was 3 years younger than me and myself. But it wasn't always that way. My biological father, Michael, passed away when I was just 5 years old. I still remember fragments of him. His deep laugh, the way he would hoist me onto his shoulders at the park, and how he always smelled like pine and coffee. Those memories are precious but fading with time. Mom stayed single for a few years after Dad died. She worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat, waitressing during the day and bookkeeping for a small business at night. I learned to be independent early, making my own breakfast and getting myself ready for school while Mom caught up on sleep. Those years were tough, but there was never any doubt that Mom loved me. She would always find time to listen to my stories from school and help with my homework despite her exhaustion. Everything changed when I turned 8 and Mom met Richard. He seemed nice enough at first, a tall, broad-shouldered accountant with a kind smile and a stable job. They dated for 6 months before getting married in a small ceremony at City Hall. I was the ring bearer. Initially, I was excited to have a father figure again. Richard would take me fishing on weekends and taught me how to throw a proper football spiral. He even set up a basketball hoop in our driveway and would play with me until the streetlights came on. "You're a good kid, Chipper," he would say, ruffling my hair. "You're going to grow up to be someone important one day." Those first 2 years with Richard were probably the happiest of my childhood. We felt like a real family again. Then Brianna was born when I was 10, and everything shifted. At first, I was excited to be a big brother. I would help feed her, make funny faces to make her laugh, and even change diapers when Mom asked. But as Brianna grew, my parents' attention increasingly focused on her. When she was 3, they took her to a child psychologist who diagnosed her with mild anxiety. That diagnosis became the justification for years of preferential treatment. "Your sister needs special attention," became my mother's constant refrain. "She's more sensitive than other children." The changes were subtle at first. If Brianna wanted one of my toys, I had to share it immediately. If she didn't want to go to bed, I had to be quiet so I wouldn't upset her. If she wanted the last piece of cake, it was automatically hers. "You're older, you should understand," my mother would say whenever I protested. By the time I was 12, the favoritism had become blatant. My parents attended every one of Brianna's dance recitals, but repeatedly missed my school events because Brianna needed them or Brianna wasn't feeling well. For my birthday that year, I received a second-hand bike while Brianna got a brand new tablet for no special occasion at all. "We need to make sure your sister feels secure," Richard explained when I pointed out the unfairness. "You're mature enough to handle these things." The summer when I was 13, I wanted to attend a basketball camp. My coach said I had real potential, and the camp could help me develop my skills for high school tryouts. The camp cost $300, which my parents said they couldn't afford. 2 weeks later, they spent $500 on a special therapist for Brianna, who used art to help with her anxiety. I started spending more time alone in my room, reading books from the library, or practicing basketball by myself at the community court. When I was home, I felt invisible. Dinner conversations revolved around Brianna's day, Brianna's feelings, Brianna's needs. If I tried to share something about my day, I was often interrupted or given cursory attention before the focus shifted back to my sister. "Not now, Chipper," became words I heard daily. "Your sister is having a hard time." By 14, I had become essentially self-sufficient. I cooked my own meals when my parents were busy with Brianna's activities. I learned to do my own laundry because Mom frequently forgot to wash my clothes. I figured out how to mend my worn sneakers with duct tape because there was never enough money for new ones, though somehow there was always enough for whatever Brianna wanted. The loneliness was the hardest part. I watched other families at school events, parents cheering proudly for their children taking photos, offering hugs and congratulations. I would scan the audience hopefully, but my seats were almost always empty. At home I existed in the periphery of my family's attention, acknowledged only when needed, or when my presence somehow affected Brianna. "Why don't you try harder to connect with your sister?" my mother would ask, as if the problem was my lack of effort rather than their constant dismissal of my existence. "She looks up to you, you know." But how could Brianna look up to someone who was treated as less important than her at every turn? How could I forge a meaningful relationship with a sister who had been taught that her needs and wants would always come before mine? As my 15th birthday approached, I stopped expecting anything from my family. I told myself I didn't care anymore, but deep down the hurt had calcified into a constant ache. I wasn't just a child being overlooked. I was actively being taught that I mattered less, that I was somehow less deserving of love and attention than my sister, that my role in the family was to accommodate, to understand, to give way. And yet, despite everything, a small part of me still hoped that someday things would change, that my parents would see me, really see me, and realize what they had been doing all these years. That hope, however faint, was the only thing keeping me going. By necessity, I became extremely independent at an early age. While other kids my age were focused on video games and hanging out, I was learning essential life skills. By 12, I could cook basic meals, scrambled eggs, pasta with jarred sauce, grilled cheese sandwiches. By 13, I was doing all my own laundry, separating colors and whites, measuring detergent carefully to make it last longer. By 14, I was handling most of my own needs without asking for help. School became my refuge. Unlike at home at school, my efforts were noticed and rewarded. Teachers praised my work ethic and intelligence. I threw myself into academics with a fervor born of wanting anyone to notice my value. Math came naturally to me. The logical patterns and concrete answers were comforting in a life that felt increasingly unpredictable. In 9th grade, I scored a perfect 100% on the state standardized math test, something only 3 other students in the district had accomplished. My math teacher, Mr. Jenkins, was ecstatic. He called my parents personally to tell them about the achievement and inform them about the district recognition ceremony. "Your son has extraordinary mathematical abilities," he told my mother. "You should be very proud." The ceremony was scheduled for a Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock. 22. I left a reminder note on the refrigerator and mentioned it at breakfast 3 days in a row. Each time my mother nodded distractedly and said they would try to make it. On the day of the ceremony, I put on my best clothes, khaki pants and a button-down shirt I had saved my allowance to buy. I combed my hair neatly and even polished my worn shoes. Mr. Jenkins had said I would need to give a short speech when accepting the award, so I had practiced in front of my mirror for days. I arrived at the school auditorium early and scanned the rows of seats as they gradually filled with other families. Parents arrived with flowers and cameras, beaming with pride. I kept watching the door, checking my watch repeatedly. The ceremony began at 7 sharp, and by 7:15 I had to accept that my parents weren't coming. After receiving my certificate and medal, I found Mr. Jenkins. My parents had an emergency. I lied the medal, feeling suddenly heavy around my neck. My sister needed to see her therapist. It wasn't entirely a lie. I later learned that my mother had indeed taken Brianna to an emergency therapy session because she was feeling anxious about an upcoming school presentation. My academic achievement simply wasn't as important as my sister's anxiety. That summer, I got my first job at Sanders Grocery, a small family-owned store 3 blocks from our house. Mr. Sanders hired me to stock shelves and bag groceries for 4 hours after school and 8 hours on Saturdays. The pay wasn't much, minimum wage, but it was money that was mine alone. With my first paycheck, I bought myself new sneakers. With the second, I purchased a second-hand graphing calculator for advanced math. With subsequent checks, I started a savings account that my parents didn't know about. Something in me understood that financial independence might someday be crucial. When sophomore year started, I joined the basketball team. Years of practicing alone had made me a decent player. Not stellar, but good enough to make the junior varsity squad. Practices were 3 days a week after school with games on Fridays. I adjusted my work schedule at the grocery store to accommodate basketball, often taking late evening shifts or Sunday hours to make up the time. Our first home game was against our school's biggest rival. The bleachers were packed with families and friends. Signs with players' names and numbers bobbed above the crowd. Parents wore school colors and cheered loudly for their children. I played my heart out that game, scoring 12 points and making a crucial steal in the final minutes that helped secure our victory. After the game, teammates were surrounded by proud parents and siblings receiving hugs and congratulations. I changed quickly in the locker room and walked home alone in the dark. "How was your game?" my mother asked absently, when I entered the house, not looking up from helping Brianna with an art project spread across the dining table. "We won," I said, simply heading upstairs to shower. No one in my family ever attended a single game during my 2 years on the team. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was playing for myself, not for an audience. But the empty ache in my chest when I looked at the empty seats where my family should have been never really went away. Despite everything, I maintained a 4.0 GPA. I studied late into the night after work and basketball practice, determined to create opportunities for myself through education. My guidance counselor started talking to me about college scholarships and programs for gifted students. For the first time, I began to see a future beyond my family's house, a future where I might be valued for who I was. As my 16th birthday approached, I decided to make one last attempt to connect with my family. 16 was supposed to be special, a milestone birthday. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the occasion when they would finally see me, when I would matter enough to be the center of attention for just one day. I planned carefully, keeping my expectations modest. I didn't want an elaborate party or expensive gifts. All I wanted was a small gathering with my family and perhaps 2 or 3 friends from school and the basketball team. I wanted a chocolate cake, my favorite since childhood but rarely purchased because Brianna preferred vanilla. I wanted to choose the restaurant for dinner, something that hadn't happened in years. I approached my mother 2 weeks before my birthday, catching her in a rare moment alone in the kitchen. "Mom, I was thinking about my birthday," I began cautiously. "Maybe we could have a small dinner, just us and maybe Jack and Devin from school. That Italian place on Main Street isn't too expensive." My mother looked up from her phone where she had been texting Brianna's art therapist. "That sounds reasonable," she said with a small smile. 16 is a big one. Let me talk to Richard about the budget, but I think we can make that work." For the first time in years, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe things were changing. Maybe I was finally old enough, mature enough, good enough to deserve their attention. Maybe my birthday would actually be about me. How wrong I was. My 16th birthday fell on a Saturday. Perfect timing for a celebration. I had been looking forward to this day for weeks, carefully planning every detail within the modest parameters my mother had agreed to. I had confirmed with my friends Jack and Devin, who were excited to join us for dinner. I had even splurged on a new shirt from my grocery store earnings, wanting to look nice for the occasion. I woke up early that morning, a sense of anticipation making sleep impossible. For once, I allowed myself to feel genuinely excited. Today would be different. Today was my day. I showered and put on my new shirt, checking my reflection in the mirror. At 16, I was already nearly 6 feet tall, with my father's strong jawline and my mother's dark eyes. For a moment, I let myself imagine him being there for this milestone. What advice he might have given, what gift he might have chosen. Downstairs, the house was quiet. I had expected at least a happy birthday greeting or perhaps a special breakfast, but the kitchen was empty. I made myself toast and eggs, trying to tamp down my disappointment. It was still early. Maybe they were planning something for later. Around 10 o'clock, my mother finally emerged from her bedroom, looking distracted and tired. She barely glanced at me as she made her coffee. "Morning," I said pointedly. "Any special plans for today?" She looked confused for a moment before recognition dawned in her eyes. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, Chiper. 16 already, wow." No hug, no card, just a belated acknowledgement that seemed more like an afterthought than a celebration. Still, I clung to the hope that dinner would be better. Maybe they were saving the real celebration for the restaurant. My hope dimmed significantly when Brianna came downstairs in tears around noon. At 13, she had perfected the art of dramatic entrances. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face blotchy from crying. She immediately ran to our mother, who enveloped her in a concerned embrace. "Baby, what's wrong?" Mom asked, stroking Brianna's hair. Between theatrical sobs, Brianna explained that she had just received several nasty text messages from girls at school. They had deliberately excluded her from a slumber party and sent her photos of them having fun without her. They had called her attention-seeking and annoying. I felt a twinge of sympathy. Bullying was painful, and no one deserved that kind of treatment. But a larger part of me felt the familiar sinking sensation that always accompanied Brianna's crises. Somehow they always seemed to coincide with any moment that might have been about me. Mom spent the next hour consoling Brianna on the couch, their heads bent close together as they scrolled through the offending messages. I sat at the kitchen table watching the clock tick closer to our reservation time, a growing knot of dread in my stomach. At 3 o'clock, Richard came home from his Saturday morning golf game. He immediately joined the consolation committee on the couch, putting a protective arm around Brianna and asking for details about the little monsters who had upset his princess. At 4:30, just an hour and a half before our dinner reservation, my mother finally looked up and caught my eye. The expression on her face told me everything I needed to know. "Chipper," she began in that gentle, reasonable voice she used when she was about to disappoint me. "We need to talk about tonight." I sat down across from them, already numb to what was coming. "Your sister is really going through something difficult right now," she continued. "These girls have been tormenting her for weeks, and she's been hiding it from us. She's feeling really vulnerable and hurt." I nodded mechanically. "Okay, but what about dinner Jack and Devin are expecting?" "That's what we need to discuss," Richard interjected. "We think it might be better to postpone your birthday dinner." "Postpone," I repeated, my voice hollow. "Just for a week or so," my mother assured me. "It's just that right now your sister needs us. She needs to feel supported and loved. And I don't." The words slipped out before I could stop them. My mother's expression hardened slightly. "That's not what we're saying. But you're older, more mature. You can handle a slight delay. Brianna is in a fragile state right now." "Actually," Richard added, "we were thinking of doing something special for Brianna tonight to lift her spirits. Maybe that pizza place she likes, and then ice cream. A little pick-me-up to show her that those mean girls don't matter." I stared at them, unable to process what I was hearing. "So you're canceling my birthday dinner to take Brianna out instead?" "We're not canceling, we're postponing," my mother corrected, her patience clearly wearing thin. "And yes, tonight we need to focus on your sister. She's sensitive and needs more attention right now. You can understand that, can't you?" "Your sister needs this," Richard said firmly. "Don't be selfish, Chipper." Selfish. The word hit me like a physical blow. After years of giving way, of understanding, of accepting less, of being overlooked and forgotten, I was selfish for wanting my own birthday to be acknowledged. "I need to call my friends," I said flatly, rising from the table. "They're expecting to be picked up soon." "Tell them we're very sorry," my mother called after me. "Maybe they can come next weekend instead." In my room, I sat on my bedphone in hand, staring at the wall. The final shred of hope I had been clinging to, that I mattered in this family, that I deserved celebration and acknowledgement just as much as Brianna, dissolved completely. The pattern was never going to change. I would always be the one expected to understand, to give way, to accept less. I would always be less important than my sister. I called Jack and Devin, making up a story about a family emergency that required us to cancel dinner. They were disappointed but understanding. Jack even offered to come over later with cupcakes if things calmed down, but I declined. I couldn't bear the thought of them seeing the truth, that my family was downstairs preparing to take my sister out for a celebration on my birthday. At 6 o'clock, I heard them leaving. The front door closing, car doors slamming, engine starting. No one came to check if I wanted to join them. No one called up to say goodbye. They simply left as if I wasn't even there. I sat in my darkened room, listening to the silence of the empty house. Through my window, I could see the stars beginning to appear in the evening sky. 16 years old today. Old enough to drive in most states, though I had no car, and no one had offered to teach me. Old enough to work longer hours. Old enough perhaps to make my own way. For hours I sat there as the house grew dark around me. Around 9:30, I heard them return. Brianna's laughter floating up the stairs, my mother's gentle admonishment to be quiet, Richard's deep voice recounting something amusing that had happened at the restaurant. No one came to check on me. No one called my name or knocked on my door. In the quiet of my room, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, a deep ache that I suspected might never fully heal. But rising alongside it was something new, a cold, clear determination. I deserved better than this. I deserved to be valued, to be seen, to be loved. And if I couldn't find that here in this house with these people, then perhaps it was time to look elsewhere. I would not spend another birthday being erased. I would not spend another year being the afterthought, the footnote in my own family. I would not continue to exist on the margins of my own life. As midnight approached, marking the end of my 16th birthday, I made a decision that would change everything. I would leave, and I would build a life where I mattered. That night sleep eluded me entirely. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities and plans. The hurt of the day had crystallized into something harder and more determined, a resolve that grew stronger with each passing hour. Around 2 in the morning, I sat up and turned on my desk lamp. With methodical precision, I began to assess my situation. What did I have? What did I need? Where could I go? My savings from the grocery store job amounted to just over $800. Not much, but enough for a start. I had my school ID, my social security card kept in a small lockbox under my bed, and my birth certificate. I had clothes, a decent backpack, and a phone, though I knew my parents could probably track or deactivate it if they wanted to. The practical aspects were daunting but not impossible. The emotional calculation was simpler. Staying meant continuing to be invisible, continuing to be less than, continuing to watch my own identity and needs be subsumed by Brianna's. Leaving meant uncertainty and hardship, but also the possibility of finding a place where I could exist fully as myself. When weighed that way, there was really no choice at all. I began to pack with quiet efficiency. Into my backpack went several changes of clothes rolled tightly to save space. My toiletries, a small photo of my biological father that I kept hidden in my desk drawer, the only possession I had that was truly precious to me, the lockbox with my important documents. My school notebooks and textbooks would have to stay behind. There simply wasn't room. Next came the difficult task of deciding what to do with my phone. I needed it for communication and emergencies, but I also knew it could be used to find me. After some consideration, I decided to keep it for now, but turn off location services and use it sparingly. As I packed, I felt a strange sense of calm descend over me. This wasn't a rash decision made in the heat of anger. It was the culmination of years of neglect and inequality, years of being the one who always had to understand, always had to accommodate, always had to accept less. It was a decision born of the clear-eyed recognition that nothing would change if I stayed. The hardest part was writing the note. What do you say to the family you're leaving behind? How do you explain a lifetime of accumulated hurt in a few sentences? In the end, I kept it simple. I'm leaving. I can't stay in a home where I'm always second best, where my birthday can be canceled for Brianna's bad day. Don't worry about me. Don't look for me. I'll be fine on my own. I've had plenty of practice. Chyper. I placed the note on my neatly made bed where it would be easily found. Then I stood in the center of my room, taking one last look around. The basketball trophies no one had ever come to see me earn. The honor roll certificates pinned neatly to a corkboard. The walls that had witnessed so many lonely nights of homework at my desk while family movie nights went on without me downstairs. There was surprisingly little I would miss about this space, about this house. The realization was both liberating and profoundly sad. At 4:30 in the morning, I shouldered my backpack and opened my bedroom door for the last time. The house was silent. Everyone sound asleep. I moved down the hallway with practiced quiet, avoiding the creaky third step on the stairs. In the kitchen, I took an apple and a granola bar from the pantry, a last meal from my family home. At the front door, I hesitated for just a moment. Was I making a mistake? Was I overreacting? Would tomorrow bring apologies and promises to do better? Even if it did, would anything actually change? The answer came in the form of a memory, my mother's voice saying, "Your sister is sensitive and needs more attention," as they prepared to celebrate her on my birthday. The look of irritation on Richard's face, when he called me selfish for wanting my own celebration. The years of being overlooked, forgotten, diminished. No, I wasn't making a mistake. I was finally valuing myself the way my family never had. I stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness, closing the door softly behind me. The spring air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers and possibility. I walked down the driveway, without looking back, my shadow, stretching long in the light of the street lamps. By the time the sun rose, I was 3 miles away, waiting at a bus stop with a ticket to Philadelphia in my hand. I had chosen the city because it was large enough to get lost in, close enough to reach easily, but far enough away to make casual searching difficult. My plan was vague beyond that. Find a place to stay, find work, figure out how to continue my education. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched my hometown recede through the window. I felt no urge to cry, no overwhelming emotion, just a quiet certainty that I was moving towards something better, even if the path would be difficult. It occurred to me as the familiar landmarks disappeared from view that no one in my family had stirred when I left. No one had heard the front door close. No one had sensed my absence. It was the final confirmation of what I had always known, but never fully accepted in that house. I had been a ghost long before I decided to disappear. The reality of homelessness hit me hard that first night in Philadelphia. The city was larger and more intimidating than I had anticipated, full of noise and movement and people who looked right through me. I found a bench in a small park. As darkness fell, my backpack clutched tightly to my chest as I tried to sleep. The hard wood dug into my back, and every distant shout or passing car jolted me awake with a surge of adrenaline. By morning, I was exhausted, hungry, and already questioning my decision. The $800 I had brought suddenly seemed pitifully inadequate in the face of city prices. A cheap motel would eat through my savings in less than 2 weeks. I needed to find work immediately. I spent that first day wandering the streets, stopping at every shop, restaurant, and business with a help wanted sign. Most took one look at my age and shook their heads. Others asked for ID, experience, or references I couldn't provide. By evening, my feet were blistered from walking, my spirits lower than they had been even on my disastrous birthday. That night was colder than the first. I found a different bench, this one under the partial shelter of a large oak tree. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by hunger pangs, and the constant vigilance required to protect my few possessions. On the third day, desperate and increasingly hungry, I spotted a dishwasher needed sign in the window of Burger Heaven, a small, greasy spoon diner 10 blocks from the park where I'd been sleeping. The manager, a heavyset man named Frank with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes, looked me up and down when I inquired about the job. "How old are you, kid?" he asked gruffly. 18, I lied, standing as tall as I could. He snorted. "Try again." Under his steady gaze, I faltered. 16. "But I'm a hard worker, sir. I learn fast, and I won't cause any trouble." Frank studied me for a long moment, taking in my rumpled clothes and the dark circles under my eyes. "You, running from something." "Not something bad," I answered carefully. "Just a bad situation." He nodded slowly, as if my vague answer had confirmed something for him. "Kitchen's in the back. $12 an hour cash. 6 hours today, see if you work out. You can eat 1 meal per shift." That first meal, a burger and fries wolfed down during a brief break, was possibly the best food I had ever tasted. The work was grueling, hot, wet, and physically demanding. By the end of the shift, my hands were red and raw from the industrial-strength detergent, my back ached from bending over the deep sink, and my clothes were soaked with sweat and dishwater. But I had $30 in my pocket and the promise of more shifts. "You did okay," Frank told me as he counted out my pay. "Come back tomorrow at 7. I nodded gratefully already, dreading another night on the park bench, but feeling marginally better about my prospects. As I turned to leave, Frank cleared his throat. "Where you staying, kid?" I hesitated, embarrassed to admit the truth. "I'm figuring that out." Frank's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened slightly. "There's a storage room in the back. Got an old cot in there from when my nephew used to stay over sometimes. It ain't the Ritz, but it's got a door that locks and nobody'll bother you there. The storage room was small and cluttered with boxes of supplies stacked against the walls and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The cot was narrow and sagged in the middle, but it was infinitely better than a park bench. That night I slept for nearly 10 hours straight, the exhaustion of the past few days finally catching up with me. Over the next few weeks I settled into a routine. I worked at Burger Heaven 6 days a week from 7 in the morning until at least 3 in the afternoon, sometimes later if they were busy. Frank paid me in cash and never asked for paperwork, though I suspected he knew I was a runaway. The other kitchen staff, mostly immigrants with their own reasons for accepting cash jobs, were kind to me in their way, teaching me Spanish phrases and occasionally bringing me homemade food. My biggest concern was continuing my education. Despite everything, I had always valued learning and didn't want to throw away my future prospects by dropping out. After some research at the public library, I learned about GED programs and high school equivalency tests. If I couldn't attend regular school, I could at least work toward this alternative. One evening, about a month after I started at Burger Heaven, I was studying a GED prep book in the diner after closing. Frank had gone home trusting me to lock up, and I was taking advantage of the quiet to focus on algebra problems. That looks like serious studying. I looked up, startled. A woman in her 40s with short gray streaked hair and glasses was standing by my table, purse slung over her shoulder. I recognized her as a regular customer who often came in for coffee and pie in the afternoons. "Just trying to keep up," I said cautiously. She glanced at the book title. "GED Prep. Aren't you young for that?" I shrugged, not wanting to explain my situation to a stranger. To my surprise, she pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "I'm Elaine Taylor. I teach at Benjamin Franklin High School just a few blocks from here." "Chipper," I replied, offering only my first name. "Well, Chipper, that equation you're working on is wrong." She pointed to my notebook. "You've made an error in the distribution." She was right. I had multiplied incorrectly, throwing off my entire solution. I erased and recalculated while she watched. "You have a good foundation," she observed. "Where did you go to school before?" Her direct question caught me off guard. "I'm between schools right now." Miss Taylor nodded thoughtfully, not pressing for details. "How old are you really?" 16. "And you're working here instead of attending school because—" I met her gaze directly. "Because this is where I am right now." Something in my tone must have communicated the finality of my answer, because she didn't push further. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "I volunteer at a youth center on weekends," she said, sliding the card across the table. "They have resources for young people in difficult situations, legal aid, temporary housing, educational support. No questions asked, no authorities called unless you want them involved." I stared at the card, uncertain. "I'm doing okay here." I can see that she acknowledged. But sleeping on a cot in a storage room isn't a long-term solution for someone with your potential. My surprise must have shown on my face because she smiled slightly. "Frank mentioned you were staying here. He's worried about you, though he'd never admit it." I pocketed the card, not committing to anything but not refusing outright either. "Thank you." Miss Taylor stood to leave. "The center has tutoring on Saturday mornings. If you wanted to stop by, I could help you with this algebra. No strings attached." 2 days later, I found myself standing outside the Adams Youth Resource Center, Miss Taylor's card clutched in my hand. The building was an old converted townhouse, with a rainbow flag in one window and a sign proclaiming, "All welcome" in the other. Inside, I found a surprisingly warm and bustling space. Young people of various ages sat in comfortable chairs or at tables, some studying, others talking quietly or using computers. No one gave me more than a passing glance as I entered. Miss Taylor spotted me from across the room and came over with a genuine smile. "I'm glad you came, Chipper. Let me show you around." Over the next few hours, she introduced me to the center and its resources. There was a computer lab where I could access online courses, a small library of textbooks and educational materials, a kitchen that served hot meals 3 times a day, and most importantly, counselors who specialized in helping teens in situations like mine. "There's a program called Safe Haven that might interest you," Miss Taylor explained. It's for young people who need temporary housing while they figure things out. Volunteer families open their homes, no foster system involvement, unless you want it, no requirement to return to your previous living situation. The idea of living in a real home again was tempting, but I was wary. These families just take in random teenagers out of the goodness of their hearts. They're carefully screened and trained, she assured me. Many of them have been through difficult situations themselves and want to give back. You'd have your own room, regular meals, and support continuing your education. And what's expected in return, I asked skeptically. Following basic house rules, continuing your education, or working. Contributing to household chores, being respectful. That's it. It sounded too good to be true, but over the next few weeks, as I continued to visit the center for tutoring and meals, I began to see that it was genuine. I met other teens in the program who spoke highly of their host families. I talked to counselors who explained the process without pressuring me to join. Finally, after nearly 2 months of sleeping on the storage room cot, I agreed to meet with a potential host family, the Wilsons, a middle-aged couple whose own children were grown and gone. David and Margaret Wilson lived in a modest but comfortable row house in a quiet neighborhood. David was a high school science teacher and Margaret worked as a nurse. They showed me a small but clean bedroom that would be mine, with a real bed, a desk for studying, and a window that looked out on their tiny backyard garden. "We don't expect you to share your story until you're ready," Margaret told me as we sat around their kitchen table eating homemade cookies. "Everyone deserves privacy and respect. But we do expect honesty going forward," David added gently. "If you're having problems, if you need help, we need you to tell us." Their straightforward approach and lack of prying questions put me at ease. By the end of the visit, I had agreed to a 2-week trial stay, starting the following weekend. Frank was surprisingly supportive when I told him I was moving. About time he grumbled, though I could see relief in his eyes. That cot was giving me a backache just looking at it. He agreed to adjust my work schedule around school hours once I enrolled in the GED program, and even offered to provide a reference letter for my employment history. On my last night in the storage room, as I packed my few possessions back into my backpack, I reflected on how far I'd come since that desperate morning when I'd first arrived in Philadelphia. I had a job. I had found people who were willing to help me without demanding explanations or making me feel less than. I had a path forward to continue my education. For the first time since leaving home, I felt something like hope for my future. Not just survival, but the possibility of building something meaningful from the broken pieces of my past. Moving in with the Wilsons marked a turning point in my life. After months of uncertainty and bare survival, I suddenly had stability. A clean, quiet room of my own, regular meals, and most importantly, adults who seemed genuinely interested in my well-being without demanding anything in return. At first, I kept my guard up, waiting for the catch, the moment when they would start treating me like an unwanted obligation or begin favoring their own needs over mine. But that moment never came. Instead, they gave me space when I needed it, and support when I asked for it, always respecting my boundaries while gently encouraging me to move forward. With the Wilsons' help, I enrolled in an accelerated GED program through the community college. The counselor was impressed by my academic record, which Miss Taylor had helped me obtain from my previous school. Based on my test scores, they estimated I could complete the program in just 4 months, instead of the usual 6 to 12. I threw myself into studying with renewed determination. Every morning I would wake up at 5:30, study for 2 hours, then work at Burger Heaven until 2 in the afternoon. Afterward, I would attend GED classes from 3 to 6, then return home for dinner and more studying. It was an exhausting schedule, but after years of being overlooked and undervalued, the feeling of working towards something that was entirely mine was exhilarating. David helped me with science and mathematics, often sitting with me at the kitchen table late into the evening, patiently explaining concepts until they clicked. Margaret assisted with essays and reading comprehension, her meticulous attention to detail helping me refine my writing skills. Neither of them ever complained about the time they spent helping me, or made me feel like a burden for needing their assistance. "Education is the one thing no one can ever take from you," David told me one night after we'd spent hours working through physics problems. "It's worth every minute we spend on it." 4 months later, I passed my GED with scores high enough to qualify for academic scholarships at several colleges. The day I received my results, the Wilsons surprised me with a small celebration dinner and a gift, a laptop of my own to use for college applications and coursework. "We're so proud of you, Chiper," Margaret said, her eyes shining with genuine emotion. "What you've accomplished in such a short time is remarkable." It was the first time in years that anyone had expressed pride in my achievements, and I found myself blinking back unexpected tears. This was what family support was supposed to feel like, not conditional on someone else's needs, not an afterthought, but a genuine celebration of my efforts and accomplishments. With my GED completed, I increased my hours at Burger Heaven to save money for college. Frank promoted me from dishwasher to line cook with a corresponding raise in pay. The work was still demanding, but I enjoyed the structured chaos of the kitchen and the satisfaction of seeing empty plates return from satisfied customers. When college application season arrived, David and Margaret helped me navigate the complex process of forms, essays, and financial aid applications. Given my unusual situation, we had to get creative with some of the requirements. But Miss Taylor wrote me a glowing recommendation, and my test scores spoke for themselves. In April, acceptance letters began to arrive. I had been admitted to 3 state universities and 2 private colleges, all with varying levels of financial aid. After careful consideration and many discussions with the Wilsons, I decided on Temple University in Philadelphia. It offered a strong computer science program, was close enough that I could continue living with the Wilsons to save money, and provided a generous scholarship that, combined with grants and a work-study position, would cover most of my expenses. That fall, at 18 years old, I began my freshman year of college. The campus was overwhelming at first. Thousands of students, sprawling buildings, a pace and energy, unlike anything I had experienced before. But I quickly found my rhythm, excelling in my computer science and mathematics courses, while struggling a bit more with humanities requirements. I joined the coding club and the intramural basketball team, slowly building a circle of friends who shared my interests and ambitions. For the first time, I was forming relationships based not on proximity or necessity, but on genuine connection and common ground. Throughout my freshman and sophomore years, I continued working part-time at Burger Heaven, though I eventually shifted to weekend shifts, only to accommodate my increasingly demanding course load. Frank grumbled about losing his best line cook to computer nonsense, but I could see the pride in his weathered face when I showed him my Dean's List certificate. The summer after my sophomore year, I landed an internship at a tech startup in Center City. The position paid well enough that I was able to contribute more substantially to the Wilsons' household expenses, despite their protests that it wasn't necessary. The experience was invaluable, giving me hands-on exposure to software development in a real-world environment. By the end of the summer, they had offered me a part-time position during the school year, which I eagerly accepted. My junior and senior years flew by in a blur of classes, coding projects, and increasingly responsible roles at the startup. I graduated summa cum laude, with a job offer already in hand, a full-time developer position with a salary that seemed almost unbelievable to someone who had once been thrilled to earn $12 an hour washing dishes. At 22, I moved into my own apartment, a small but modern one-bedroom in a renovated building not far from the Wilsons. They helped me furnish it, insisting on buying me a comfortable couch for when we come visit. The day I signed the lease, David handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a keychain with a single key on it. To our house, he explained, his voice gruff with emotion. "You always have a home with us, no matter what." By 23, I had been promoted to senior developer with a substantial raise that allowed me to start building significant savings for the first time in my life. I purchased my first car, nothing fancy but reliable, and paid for in full. I began contributing monthly to a retirement account, thinking long-term in a way that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. Through it all, the Wilsons remained my family in every way that mattered. Sunday dinners at their house were a sacred tradition. They attended my college graduation, cheering loudly when my name was called. They listened to my work stories, offered advice when asked, and gave me space to make my own decisions and occasionally my own mistakes. Frank remained a part of my life as well, though I had long since stopped working at Burger Heaven. I would stop by for lunch periodically, and he would refuse to let me pay, grumbling that kids these days don't appreciate a good burger. Miss Taylor had retired from teaching, but still volunteered at the youth center, where I now sometimes helped with tutoring sessions, wanting to give back to the place that had been instrumental in changing my life. As my professional network expanded, so did my personal one. I formed close friendships with colleagues who shared my passion for technology. I dated occasionally, though I was careful about letting people get too close too quickly. The scars of my early family experience made trust a slow and cautious process for me. On my 24th birthday, 8 years after the disastrous birthday that had set me on this path, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment. The Wilsons were there, of course, along with Frank, Miss Taylor, and a handful of close friends from work and college. As I looked around at these people who had chosen to be in my life, who valued me for who I was, who celebrated my accomplishments, and supported me through challenges, I felt a sense of peace I had never experienced in my childhood home. I had built this piece by piece, not just a career or an apartment, but a life where I mattered, a life where I was seen, a life where I was loved, not despite who I was, but because of it. And then just a few days after that birthday celebration, the email arrived, from an address I hadn't seen in 8 years, with a subject line that simply read, "I'm sorry." The email sat unopened in my inbox for 3 days. Every time I logged in, I would see it there, my mother's name bold against the white background, both familiar and strange after so many years. Part of me wanted to delete it unread, to maintain the clean break I had made and the new life I had built. But another part, the part that had once desperately wanted to be seen and valued by my family, couldn't quite hit the delete button. On the 4th day, sitting alone in my apartment with a cup of coffee, I finally opened it. "Dear Chipper, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if this email address still works. I don't even know if you're okay, though I pray every day that you are. It's taken me 8 years to write this email, not because I haven't thought of you every single day, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you apologize for failing so completely as a mother? How do you ask forgiveness for something that might be unforgivable? I'm sorry, Chipper. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for the way we treated you, for making you feel less important, less loved, less valued than your sister, for turning your 16th birthday into yet another day about Brianna, for never seeing how much we were hurting you until you were gone. Things fell apart after you left. Richard and I divorced 2 years later. Brianna's anxiety worsened significantly. She dropped out of high school and has been in and out of treatment programs. I realize now that our excessive focus on her didn't help her. It made her more fragile, less able to cope with the normal challenges of life. None of this is to make excuses. There are no excuses for how we failed you. If you're willing, I would like to see you. Just once, to apologize in person, to see that you're okay. You can name the time, place, and conditions. If you never want to see or hear from me again after that, I'll respect your decision. I love you. I always have, even when I failed to show it. Mom." I read the email 3 times, my emotions cycling between anger, vindication, sorrow, and a strange hollow emptiness. Part of me felt satisfied that they had suffered consequences for their actions. Another part felt sad for Brianna, who had been as much a victim of our parents' dysfunctional approach as I had been, albeit in a very different way. But mostly, I felt distant from it all, as if reading about characters in a book rather than my own family. 8 years was a long time. I had built an entire adult life without them. The urgent need for their approval and love that had defined my childhood felt like a phantom limb. I could remember the sensation, but it was no longer attached to me. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I talked it through with David and Margaret during our next Sunday dinner, showing them the email and asking for their perspective. "Whatever you decide, we'll support you," Margaret said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "This is entirely your choice." "Do you think seeing her would give you any closure?" David asked thoughtfully. "Or would it just reopen old wounds?" It was a good question, one I pondered for several days afterward. What did I want from this potential meeting? What could it possibly give me that I didn't already have? In the end, curiosity won out. I wanted to see who my mother had become in these 8 years, just as she wanted to see who I had become. I replied with a brief email suggesting we meet at a coffee shop halfway between Philadelphia and my hometown on neutral ground. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, choosing a table near the back with a clear view of the door. I recognized her immediately when she walked in, older, grayer, with new lines around her eyes and mouth, but unmistakably my mother. She scanned the room anxiously until her eyes landed on me, and I saw the shock register on her face. I had changed too, of course. The gangly 16-year-old was now a confident young man in professional clothes with a different haircut and 8 years of life experience etched into my features. "Chipper," she breathed as she approached the table. "You look so grown up," I supplied, gesturing for her to sit. "I was going to say, like your father," she said softly. "You have his eyes, his way of sitting. I didn't notice it as much when you were younger." An awkward silence fell between us. She clutched her purse on her lap, knuckles white with tension. "Thank you for meeting me," she finally said. "I honestly wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. "But I was curious." She nodded, accepting this less than warm response. "You have every right to hate me." "I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I don't feel much of anything toward you anymore. It's been a long time." Her face crumpled slightly at this, but she recovered quickly. "That's fair. More than fair." She took a deep breath. "You disappeared so completely. We filed a missing persons report, but the police said that at 16, with no signs of foul play and a note indicating you left voluntarily, there wasn't much they could do. I hired a private investigator, but you'd covered your tracks well." "I hadn't, actually. I'd just gone to a big city and blended in with all the other anonymous faces, but it was interesting to hear they had at least made some effort to find me." "What happened after I asked?" "Your email mentioned a divorce." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "About 2 years after you left. Things between Richard and me had been deteriorating for a while, but losing you, it broke something fundamental between us. He blamed me for not seeing how unhappy you were. I blamed him for always favoring Brianna so obviously." She gave a bitter laugh. "We were both right, of course. And Brianna I asked more out of politeness than genuine concern." My mother's expression turned pained. "Your leaving hit her hard, though in a different way than it hit us. She had always been anxious, but after you disappeared, she developed severe depression and guilt. She felt responsible for driving you away, for always being the center of attention at your expense. She started acting out, skipping school, eventually experimenting with drugs. She's been in and out of treatment centers for the past few years." I absorbed this information with a complex mix of emotions. I had never wished harm on my sister. My resentment had been directed at my parents' behavior, not at Brianna herself. She had been a child too shaped by the same dysfunctional family dynamics that had driven me away. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. "She asks about you sometimes," my mother continued cautiously. "Wonders if you're okay, what you're doing with your life." "I'm doing well," I said simply. "I finished my education. I have a good job in software development, my own place. I'm happy." "I'm glad," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "So glad. I've worried every day about whether you were safe, whether you had enough to eat, whether you had a roof over your head." I could have told her about the park benches, the storage room cot, the constant hunger of those first few weeks. I could have made her feel even worse than she already did. But what would be the point? That chapter of my life was closed, and reopening it would serve no purpose except inflicting pain. "I had help," I said instead. "Good people who saw something in me worth supporting. I found my way." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I should have been one of those people. Your father, your real father, would be so disappointed in me. He adored you. After he died, I was so focused on my own grief, on finding stability again with Richard, on making that new family work. I lost sight of the family I already had, of the amazing son I was so lucky to have." The mention of my biological father stirred something in me, a faint, warm memory of being truly and unconditionally loved. It was perhaps the only purely positive familial feeling from my early childhood. "Why did you want to meet?" I asked directly. "What are you hoping for here?" She seemed taken aback by the bluntness of my question, but answered honestly. "Forgiveness, I suppose, though I know I don't deserve it. Reassurance that you're okay, maybe. a chance to be part of your life again, in whatever small way you might allow. I considered her words carefully. I don't hate you, I repeated. And I'm not angry anymore, not really. That took a lot of work and a lot of time, but I can't just pick up where we left off and pretend the past didn't happen. I understand, she said quickly. I don't expect that. Any relationship would have to be on your terms at your pace. I wasn't sure there would be any relationship at all, but I didn't say that outright. I need to think about it. This is a lot to process. She nodded disappointment, visible in her eyes, but accepting my response. Of course, can I? Would it be okay if I emailed you occasionally, just to check in? It seemed like a small enough concession. That would be fine. As our meeting came to an end, and we prepared to go our separate ways, she hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. I've carried this with me to every coffee shop in 3 counties for the past month, hoping I might find you, she explained. It's 8 years late, but happy birthday, Chiper. Inside the package was a silver pocket watch that I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my biological father. I had admired it as a child, fascinated by the intricate mechanism visible when the case was opened. I should have given this to you years ago, she said softly. It was always meant to be yours. I closed my hand around the watch, feeling its weight and solidity. Thank you. We parted with an awkward half-hug, neither of us quite sure how to navigate this new tentative connection. As I watched her walk to her car, I felt neither the catharsis of reconciliation nor the righteous anger of rejection. Instead, I felt something quieter and more complex, a recognition that while the past had shaped me, it no longer defined me. Driving back to Philadelphia, I reflected on the strange winding path that had brought me to this point, the painful birthday that had prompted my departure, the hardship of those first months on my own, the unexpected kindness of strangers who became more family to me than my biological relatives had ever been, the hard work and determination that had transformed me from a homeless teenager to a successful professional. I had built a life for myself, not despite the challenges I had faced, but in many ways because of them. The self-reliance I had been forced to develop as a neglected child had served me well when I struck out on my own. The academic focus that had once been my escape from family dysfunction had become the foundation of my career. Even the emotional resilience I had cultivated to survive my childhood had helped me navigate the uncertainties of adulthood. That evening back in my apartment, I placed my father's pocket watch on my bedside table and called David and Margaret to tell them about the meeting. As always, they listened without judgment, offering support without trying to influence my decisions. Whatever relationship you choose to have or not have with your biological family is entirely up to you, Margaret reminded me. There's no right or wrong answer here. Just remember that family isn't always defined by blood, David added. Sometimes it's defined by who shows up, who stays, who sees you for who you really are. Their words resonated deeply with me, crystallizing the most important lesson of my journey. Sometimes we have to build our own families piece by piece from the people who value us as we are. Sometimes the place we truly belong isn't where we start out, but where we eventually find ourselves. In the years since that coffee shop meeting, I've maintained limited, cautious contact with my mother. Occasional emails, a rare phone call on holidays. I've met Brianna once a stilted lunch, where we both struggled to find common ground as the adults we'd become rather than the children we'd been. I've never rekindled a relationship with Richard and have no desire to do so. But the family I've built, the Wilsons, Frank, Miss Taylor, the close friends who have stood by me through challenges and celebrations, those relationships continue to deepen and flourish. They are my real family, chosen deliberately and maintained with care and appreciation. If you're watching this and feeling unseen or undervalued in your own family, know that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. You deserve to be valued, to be celebrated, to be loved for exactly who you are. Sometimes finding that requires difficult choices and uncertain paths. But I promise you there is a place where you belong, even if you have to build it yourself. Have you ever had to create your own support system when your family failed you? How did you find the strength to walk away from toxic relationships? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share in this video if it resonated with you. Remember, your story matters, and sometimes telling it can help others find the courage to write their own new chapters. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the strength to build the life you deserve, surrounded by people who truly see your worth.